Hello guys, Omni here with Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker finally out in the wild. I thought it'd be a perfectly scary time to go ahead and give you guys my personal rankings of all 11 live action Star Wars films. And the reason I didn't include the Clone Wars animated movie was because it's one, animated, and two, really just a collection of episodes. So I didn't think it really qualified. So this is just going to be the live action Star Wars films, the 11 that we have. And I'd like to go ahead and preface this because I know we're going to get some opinions and I would love to hear them in the comments and we'll have those conversations afterwards. But let me preface this with the fact that I'm basing this on enjoyability, not so much as what is the most well-made movie. It's really, for me personally, I thought the best way for me to rank these would based on how likely am I to rewatch this movie. And that's really where this all kind of kicks off on. And we're going to start off at the bottom of the list. And honestly, I know this is going to be the most controversial one, more than likely, but number 11 on my list is The Last Jedi. I don't talk about this movie because I don't like talking about the controversy that comes along with it, the division that comes along with it. So I know we really haven't talked about it too much on the channel, aside from in my recent Rise of Skywalker review, I talked about it a little bit, but this out of all them films, this is the one I'm least likely to watch, mostly because it's drab. I think it just kind of throws a wrench into a lot of the character arcs and the storylines from the original trilogy. And really, even though it has some of the best moments in the series as a whole, overall, I cannot watch it. It's joyless. And I think what they did with some of the characters is, for me personally, unforgivable. And that's the end of that. Number 10 is going to be Solo. Now, I didn't hate this movie. I thought it was okay. I didn't think we needed to get this story, and it was really just unimpressive. I liked a lot of the moments. I liked the actors that they had in it. I liked the way they portrayed certain things, but in all essence, we didn't need to know this story. It really was just like a really high-budgeted retcon to the 12 parsec line from the original trilogy. That's really all it is. Number 9 is going to be The Force Awakens. I really enjoyed this film. I thought it really set up a lot of great ideas to move forward into this sequel trilogy. That being said, knowing how it all kind of pans out and just the way the movie's kind of paced compared to some of the other Star Wars films, going back and rewatching it isn't necessarily one of the things I always look forward to doing. I think I've only watched it 3 times in the entirety of its release. Once in the theaters and maybe I think only 2 times since I've watched it since actually owning it. Number 8 on my list is going to be Attack of the Clones. And this is mostly because I think out of a lot of the Star Wars movies, this is the clunkiest. It has some action. It definitely has the lightsaber draw, and I think the lightsaber battle between Yoda and Dooku towards the end, as well as the Geonosis arena area, was really fun to play with. But a lot of the romance dialogue and stuff like that keeps it down at the very bottom here as far as the original 1 through 6 pre-Disney films. This puts it right slap dab at the bottom for that. Number 7 for me is going to be Rogue One. I thought this movie was actually really good. It's not the best piece together as far as having all the cast together that they have. Not everybody gets equal screen time or building or development. Some of the characters shine a lot more than others. K2SO is honestly my favorite thing in the entire movie, but I like what this showed. It definitely spiced up and moved to a different corner of the galaxy, and the way that The Mandalorian, I think, does. This movie showed us the boots on the ground people who are just living out in the world and fighting for it. The resistance, the rebellion, these people who they're not empowered by the Force. They're not walking around with a lightsaber or anything like that. They're just putting their lives on the line for the cause. And I thought that was a very well done, and it really showed off the pace. And plus, that Vader scene by itself is one of the best moments in all of Star Wars, hands down. The hallway Vader scene at the end of the movie. Even if the rest of the movie I think was bad, I think that scene in by itself puts it at least at this spot on the list. My number 6 is going to be The Phantom Menace. And though it introduces Jar Jar, which over time I've lightened up on, it doesn't really bother me that much. I enjoy him. And with Clone Wars, they definitely do a lot more with the character that I really like. But given in this movie, I really like it. The CGI definitely does not hold up. The politics It's really wonky and weird understanding, but you just can't get over Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn and Ewan McGregor being introduced as young Obi-Wan. That was the highlights of this movie, and it's still got one of the best lightsaber battles at the end with those two fighting Darth Maul and Duel of the Fates. Such a fantastic just score. The last part of that movie, aside from I'm forgetting the pod race. I thought the pod race was really awesome and fun. And it just, even though everything else around the movie, maybe not that perfect, but it has some great, key, fun, top tier moments within it. Number 5 for me is going to be The Rise of Skywalker. The movie's clunky. Some of the things don't add up, doesn't make sense. I watched it twice. I watched it again yesterday, and leaving a lot of that initial baggage and knowledge of what's going on around the movie aside the second time, I really liked it a lot more. I loved every moment. It's still silly. Some of the moments are really stupid, but it brings in a lot of EU elements that I really like, that I'm so glad we got to see. And this movie was the most I've cared for any of these characters, and the way it redeems Luke's arc from the last movie, loved it. It gets a little weird. It gets a little wonky. I have definitely some nitpicks and some things I definitely would have preferred it did, but I think easily it's the best, most easily rewatchable of the sequel trilogy. Number 4 for me is going to be A New Hope, and that's really because this is the start of the journey. It's when Luke is the least experienced. It's the most grounded, pretty well-constructed story in the whole bunch. It really kicked everything off. It really starts everything, but when you kind of think of how it compares to some of the other stories, it doesn't have all the greatest action in it, but it does introduce all the fun characters from the original trilogy. It kicks the ball rolling, and it's just like so many key moments to Star Wars, and it's the beginning. It's where it all started. It was the New Hope, and I love it. Number 3 for me is going to be Empire Strikes Back. So many good moments in this movie. This is, I think, objectively the best film in the franchise. Narratively, performances, and just storyline in general. I love in a story where things don't quite... I like when things end on a downer beat, when it really shows you the stakes, when things feel they're at their worst, because that's when your characters are really tested. And this movie, it's got the I am your father scene. It's just great. Lightsaber fight, Force, Yoda, so many great moments in this movie. Number 2 for me is going to be Return of the Jedi. And this, for me, for a long time, growing up, I rewatched this movie all the time. On the VHS that I had, watched it at least once a week for the most part. I watched this movie so much, I wore out that tape. This movie has so much fun. It's the most lighthearted. It's a lot easier for me to watch something with a little more lighter tone to it. But this movie had a lot of fun. The opening sequences on Tatooine with Boba Fett, with Luke, with Jabba. There's so many fun moments with the Rancor. And, the Ewoks are the Ewoks, and I always thought that was weird. But the ending capstone scenes at the end with the fight between Vader and Luke on the second Death Star, and then just Emperor Palpatine and all of his so quotable lines. There's just so much from that movie that just still calls back and echoes with me today. I just adore it. And it's where we see Luke ascend and where he rises above that darkness that called to him. In that moment of hesitation, that moment of sacrifice and trust that he puts on the light side and his father to allow Anakin Skywalker to return and redeem and bring balance to the Force, as the chosen one was meant to do. And that leads us to my number 1 pick, and that is Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Now this, again, I think this is easily the best of the prequel films. This movie, I thought, where the dialogue is not that great. George Lucas in general is not that great at writing dialogue or even really directing emotion out of certain actors, because I don't think a lot of the actors and actresses in this film are really great in other things, but this is some of the lowest that they've had. That aside, I think when I think of the prequels, I think of more of the emotional journey that we're going on, the background, the poeticness of it. And this one is filled to the brim with it. I think some of the best acting in it is actually when there's no dialogue. The scene between Padme and Anakin when he's pondering going to interfere with Mace Windu going after Palpatine was gorgeous. That was so well done. But I mean, once they start talking, it gets a little wonky. But I think the movie, it has some of the great best action set pieces in it, some of the best battles in it. The starfight at the beginning of the movie is fantastic. It introduces some lore and world expansion with the Darth Plagueis the Wise story that Palpatine tells Anakin at the orchestra or whatever that is. It just really expands the world in it, and it really shows us how the world gets into the point that it is when the Empire picks over in A New Hope and Rogue One. And it just, the fall, the brotherhood, the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin, that mentorship, that familial relationship that they grew and developed over all these years that started back when they found him as a kid, where, you know, he was reluctantly and even part of bringing him along into the Jedi Order, and then he ended up being his master, becoming his best friend, his brother in combat, his mentor, master, family. And just seeing that relationship be corrupted from Palpatine and degrade and devolve into that just emotional climactic battle. And that is, even though if you talk about the over choreographed combat, which I think is barely a complaint, because we're talking about skilled combatants in a time where their techniques, their skill, their saber abilities were so much higher because they were so much more reformed. And we're talking about fighters who can predict the future. So of course it's going to seem choreographed. That's just my explanation to it. I mean, they're Jedi. They see what is coming. So it's not going to look like a smack and stick kind of fight if you're going back in this age where the Jedi were prominent, they were trained, they were honed, they weren't just clinging to life. I feel like that's where you see them at the peak of their ability and skill, and that's when you're going to have the most complex movements, fights, and that fight, even though it gets a little crazy and swinging from the rafters, flying on the lava, and I have the high ground, I loved every moment of it. It had me emotional. The first time I saw it, I was weeping like a little baby because of how it was tearing apart their relationship between Anakin and Obi. And just that moment with Ewan McGregor on the hillside, the lava side, watching his brother burn, that is just one of the best performances and deliveries, I think, in Star Wars at that moment. "You're my brother, Anakin." That whole thing. I loved it. And that's it. That's my order. That's my ranking. I know there's going to be some comments, but I'm putting this out there. I'm taking the brave step and throwing this out there for you guys to start this conversation here, so we can kind of see eye to eye. I want to know what you guys think. What is your guys' order for these films? If you're brave enough to throw your opinion out into the wind, so take that challenge as you will. I want to talk to you guys about your lists down in the comments below. So if you like this video, support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. But I will catch you guys in the new year, and may the Force be with you always. Take care, everybody.